I mean, the great thing about this morning is coming in from the moment I got that great cup of real coffee, a nice coffee cake. Who made the coffee cake? Oh, it's fab. This place is just teeming with life. And that's what church is about, isn't it? Church is actually about people, not buildings. It's about relationships, not religion. And it's about something that God has started. It's not just made up by people. And when we read the Bible, it's full of God's heart and God's life, and it's lovely to be in a place this morning where instantly just feel that amazing welcome of people and the presence of God in the place. So it's great to be with you. I want to talk about everyday miracles. Now there is a clock up there, so we're safe this morning. Not that preachers take any notice of clocks, but I will try. Everyday miracles. Matthew 14. And I'm going to read the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000 to you. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. And hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. And as evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away, so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They don't need to go away. You give them something to eat." "We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," the disciples answered. Jesus said, "Bring those here to me." And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the to the people. And they all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, and also women and children. Absolutely extraordinary story. I'm sure many of you will have heard that story before, of Jesus miraculously feeding 5,000 people. Plus, actually, it's more than 5,000, maybe closer to 10 when you add up all the women and kids that are there as well. And very simply, I just want to unpack this for a little bit with you this morning. And I want to speak about everyday miracles. I believe that God is on the move. All around the world, God is moving. The Bible speaks about a God who's on the move. I've been recently, over the last year or so actually, looking again at the book of Acts, the beginning of the church. After Jesus goes into heaven and goes back to his Father, he said that he'd send the Holy Spirit upon everybody that believes in him, and that they would start to be his witnesses, first in Jerusalem and then the surrounding areas, then to the end of the earth. And the book of Acts tells that story of how they begin to just be witnesses of Jesus. Ordinary people. These were disciples that actually, when we read the Gospels, it's really surprising. Not like a religious book at all. It tells the truth about people. It really tells us life as it really is. We see the disciples were men, and also there are many women followers of Jesus in the Gospels who were just warts and all, just ordinary folk with big ups and big downs, with real life stories. Sometimes they got it wrong, very, very publicly. Peter, for example, was not always the perfect follower of Jesus. He was somebody that betrayed Jesus. He was somebody that had a hot temper and was always putting his foot in it, saying things before his brain was in gear. James and John. John, who writes the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation, we might think of as a really religious guy, but actually these two were nicknamed the Sons of Thunder. They were brothers you didn't want to mess with, because they were fiery and hot-tempered. And I think they had that name because of a certain reputation. Maybe they'd been in the local bars in Capernaum and knocked a few people out that had disagreed with them. And so when Jesus meets those kind of people, he meets real people, ordinary people, and he calls them to himself. Do you know, today nothing's changed. Jesus meets real people, ordinary people. He steps into our world, and he wants to call us not to suddenly become this kind of religious people, but to be real with him, living in relationship with him, and then finding out how we can share him with our world, with other real people, that are going through the ups and downs of life. So I believe God's on the move, and we're ordinary people, but we have an extraordinary God. I don't know whether it's it's a lovely day out there today, a little bit windy. Hoping the crossing going back will be fine, but a lovely day. We've got some great weather, but it doesn't have to be a sunny day for us to encounter the love of God. God's with us whether it's a good day or a tough day, whether it's a Monday and the bills are due, or whether the exams, and some of the youngsters will have exams right now, and there's a lot of pressure on, and whatever we're going through, God is a good God, and He wants us to live with that real understanding that though we're ordinary, He's extraordinary. The world around us in the UK is very hostile to the Christian message at the moment. Even just coming over today, I was reading some more stories about, a doctor, a GP that's being disciplined by the medical council for talking about his Christian faith to a patient. And he is one of a number of doctors in Kent that are practicing medicine, but also telling people that sometimes, it's not just physical needs that we have spiritual needs as well. And he's fighting that now through the courts in order to continue to be able, as a follower of Jesus, to wisely and sensitively, but give people a way of seeing that there's more to life than just the physical. But we live in a nation and a community often that's quite hostile to the message of Jesus and to the good news of the gospel. So how do we live in this kind of world? I really believe that Jesus has some real clues for us in this story today. That we need to be like the early church was, not afraid of the world around us, not being silent, but confident and full of faith that He can help us to reach out and to every day live in His love and live in His power. I believe that that's already what's happening in this church, that people here have got stories of how God has been real to them. It's not just about showing up on Sunday and ticking the church attendance thing. I don't think you'd be here if Jesus was real to you. I can see just by the signs that are around this church that there is life here. And though life happens and stuff happens, real people are trusting Jesus to make a difference and to break through for them and for others. And I want to encourage that in you, whatever the next step of the journey is, as you guys walk forward in God, exciting things ahead. Nonetheless, it's good for us to be realistic and to look at where we are right now, where our starting place is. So here's Jesus in a remarkable moment. Jesus has been healing the sick. He's been performing miracles. He's been speaking this amazing stuff in a way that actually the religious people say and the ordinary people say there's something about Him. In fact, the Bible tells us that the ordinary people received Him with joy. They said, we've never heard anybody speak like this. There's such power in what He says. It's not just words, but He really does the stuff. He really does what He says. And so they're amazed by Him. But Jesus at this point is tired. He's been giving out and giving out. We read in the Bible that in the Gospels that Jesus, although He's fully God, comes as the Son of God, but He comes into a physical body. He deliberately lays aside some of his attributes, his kind of character as God's Son, and steps into the limitations of our world and of being a man. And that's one of those moments that we're reading where Jesus is tired and He withdraws at the end of the day, this particular day, by boat to a solitary place. I've thought to myself, I wonder why He does that. Maybe He just wants to get away from the crowd. Maybe it's just that He's given out and given out. You ever felt like that? Just want to get away. I want to be alone. Jesus wanted to be alone. But maybe actually it's because He wants to be alone for another reason. The Bible tells us that Jesus often sought to be on His own with His Father, to pray, to seek God, His Father, before He would go back into action. And so we're seeing the pattern of Jesus' life. He wants to be alone, but He wants to, I think, have some time with God the Father, away from the crowd and away from the crush. It reminds me that we need that too. That guys, as much as it's great to be together, and buzzing like this today, there are also some times where we just need to be alone. And we need to allow God to speak, to need some time for us to just talk to Him. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be in somebody else's language. In fact, it's better if it isn't. It has to be you and me talking to God in ordinary, everyday ways. But it tells us that the crowd they rumble. They get news of where Jesus is going. And so they follow Him on foot from all the surrounding towns. Verse 14. Matthew tells us when Jesus lands at the other side of the lake, He sees a huge crowd. Now, I want you to just think about that for a moment. You want to be alone. You're sick and tired of being, maybe Jesus wasn't sick and tired of being with people, but often we are. And He gets to the other side of the lake, and the crowds are already waiting for Him. You know, those that are in the public eye say that the attention is great at first. I'm sure Kate Middleton, you know, first of all she began dating William when she was up at St Andrews University. I'm sure that there must have been some time when she thought, this is amazing. I'm going out with the future King of England, or the King of Britain. And actually, over time, over many years, she's become accustomed to what that means, to the good bits of it, and to the tough times. The paparazzi outside, waiting just to snap you, no longer being able to go to Sainsbury's or Morrison's or Tesco, whatever your choice of super. I see there's a Waitrose in the Isle of Wight, the posh one. So wherever she goes, she can't just go out shopping because the paparazzi are waiting and to snap her every move. And I'm sure that the fun and the gloss wears off when you're Mr. or Miss Popular, or however much we think that might be great. Well, Jesus has enough reason here to be really irritated. Certainly the disciples are. The disciples that are with Him are not good at responding to the pressure of the crowds. And at this moment we see that Jesus gets to where He wants to be alone, and He finds that everybody's turned up. You imagine you go on your favourite holiday destination. You know, you find that secluded beach or that secluded bit of woodland, and everybody you know has already beaten you to it. I think, what a pain. That's Jesus right now. What does it say? When Jesus saw the large crowd, He was irritated. It says He had compassion on them and healed their sick. Other versions in the Gospels tell us that He had compassion on them because He saw that they were like sheep without a shepherd. Now, even though I live in Wales and there's lots of Welsh lamb in Wales, I don't know much about sheep. But in His community there in Galilee, they did. And the image that He draws and the picture that the Gospel tells us there is very real to them. They were like wandering sheep that didn't have any direction in life. And so Jesus sees a crowd and He has compassion on them. I wonder how we are with crowds. You know, I live in a city. It's not a big city really compared to London, but it's a city. And driving around the place that I know, actually it's hard to understand a city or a crowd. Yesterday there were loads of rugby fans in Cardiff, and my daughter, who's 16, was working in a restaurant from, most of the day really. The Irish were over playing Northampton in the rugby, the Heineken Cup final. And so the city was full of visitors, crowds of people, and the stadium's right in the middle of the city. They built it, there's no parking there, but the crowds love it because they're able to spend the whole day in the city centre and then go to the match. And rugby crowds are pretty good. They're not like football crowds. They're well behaved. But there was a buzz in the city yesterday. Crowds of people. I often look at crowds, and actually there's something slightly scary about a big crowd. There can be. There's something also quite powerful about it. All those people, who are they? Where are they heading? What are they facing in the days ahead? And as Jesus looks at a large crowd, He's not irritated, He's not looking at them as faceless people. The Bible tells us he has compassion on them. I want to stir that up in you and me this morning. That actually, as we look at the crowds that are around us, shopping in the supermarket or in the high street or on the beach in the summer or just going about every day, thousands of people all around us, that God wants to give us new eyes and maybe a new heart to see them. I was talking about street pastors and healing on the streets, actually, just a couple of you beforehand. See that that's something going on in the area, and there's an amazing opportunity there. Some of you already maybe are involved in that, and are seeing that as you get close to people on the streets, that God really will give you a heart for them, that they don't just become faces in a crowd, they become individual people with real needs, real desires, maybe some ups and downs in life that Jesus wants to speak into. So I'm just seeing here the crowds matter to God. The fact that there are thousands of people in this town and on this island matters to God. A man by the name of Bill Hybels, a church leader in Chicago, has been kind of rattling this one for a lot of years to churches just like us and to church leaders and all kinds of people. Every opportunity to say lost people matter to God. They matter so much to God that Jesus talks about the sheep leaving the 99 and going to find just one who's not with him. I want you to remember that. Crowds matter to him. And Jesus gives this sense of the crowds really being valuable to him. He has compassion on them and he does something about it. He heals their sick. But moving quickly on, I don't want to take very long over this. Actually, as evening approached, the disciples come to him and say, this is a remote place, it's getting late, send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. He's been teaching the crowds for hours. He's been healing their sick. It's been amazing. Awesome. What a day that would be to witness if we had YouTube back then. Wouldn't it be great? Why didn't they have YouTube in the Bible days? It's not fair, is it? You know, we can actually watch some of this stuff actually happening instead of just reading about it. But you know, what I read here and what I see here is that the day is now almost over, and the disciples come, and it sounds so helpful and so sort of, you know, it sounds like they're just really doing a great job of thinking about the people, but I don't think that's their motive at all. I think they're tired and they want to go home. I think they're thinking, come on Lord, the service has gone on for 6 hours already. We've heard all this before. You know, it's getting late and I'm hungry. And you know, we're miles from anywhere. They're just very human. Ordinary people. Ordinary people. Right in the midst of all the action. Do you ever live like, sometimes you maybe feel to yourself, if only I was 2,000 years ago able to walk with Jesus, I wouldn't have a doubt, I wouldn't have a fear, I wouldn't have a care, because he'd be there. But the reality is, when we read the stories of those that were with him, they were just like we are. They weren't always as confident in faith as they hoped they would be. They didn't always come out of it as well as they'd like. They were just ordinary people. I think they want people to go home because they're tired and they've had enough. You know, sometimes we can be like that in the middle of just the presence of God, in the middle of the stuff that we really believe in, but we just get tired and weary. And I think God understands that. You know what's amazing is Jesus doesn't leave them there. Actually, he wants to do something in them that takes them beyond that attitude and that feeling. Jesus says they don't need to go away. You give them something to eat. Now, that's a real spiritual slap, I think. Because there's no Sainsbury's around. They're in the middle of nowhere. They are literally out in the wilds. And the disciples have just made their case. Lord, there's nowhere for miles. Send them home so they can get fed. And Jesus said, no, you give them something to eat. You can imagine the panic on the faces of the disciples as Jesus has just said, it's down to you boys, sort it out. Now, we have here in Matthew's Gospel just a quick version of what happens. Other Gospels give us a bit more detail, but basically Matthew tells us that they say, we've got nothing. How does that happen? Well, I think immediately when Jesus says, you give them something, they look around and anybody got anything with them? No. One boy is found, one of the other Gospels tells us, who's got 5 loaves and 2 fish. He's still got his lunch. I wonder whether everybody else has just rushed off and not had time to make anything. Some of them are probably eating theirs earlier in the day, but now they're hungry again. But there's one boy who's saved his packed lunch till later on, and he's got his sandwiches, fish sandwiches. Doesn't sound very appealing, does it really? But he makes it available to the disciples, and they almost pathetically say, all we got is this. I want you to see that Jesus does something here that I think is really, really wonderful. What he says is, they don't need to go away, they don't need to go, you give them something. What he does right there is he invites the ordinary disciples into meeting the needs of the crowds. He invites them. This is the same Jesus that's just healed the sick that afternoon. This is the same Jesus that when they were panicked in the boat and the storm was coming, calmed the sea. This is the guy who could deliver the goods. This is the guy who could cater for the whole occasion. At the click of his fingers. And yet, he doesn't do it. There and then he says, you feed them. You do it. You do it. Have you ever felt like really following Jesus was going to be about him doing everything? Him sorting out our community. Him sorting out the church. Him providing for the needs. Him doing the stuff in those areas. Sometimes I think I have, if I'm honest. But actually here it seems like he wants his followers to know that he wants them to be involved in bringing about the change. That it's not just going to zap from heaven, or that he's always going to do it himself, but he's going to do it through ordinary people. It's a simple message this morning. Jesus says, you give them something to eat. They say, we've only this little bit. So here's the next step. If Jesus might be calling us, like the disciples, to meet the needs of the crowds. To have compassion on them and not stop there and not think we'll wait for God to do it one day far away. But actually for us to step up and to be available to God. To start to meet their needs. Then where do we begin? How do we start? That's my question. So Jesus, I think again the Gospels put it in different ways from different perspectives, but all of them agree on this. Jesus really said to them, you meet their needs, you give them something. And the next question is this: what do you have to begin with? Where do you start with? You know, it's fantastic just quickly to get a sense of what's happening in this church today. People maybe that have come to faith in Jesus in recent years. You know some of the stories. Some of you've told your own story of what's happened. And as you're praying and planning, and the leaders here are thinking about the next step, what we're going to do in that we're filling the building, and what next, and are we going to stop? No. And I love that telling you this morning. You know, that sense of, hey, we can't stop. This is God at work. But as we begin to look at that, sometimes we can look at what we have and almost give up. Because it seems so little compared to the real needs, the huge needs out there. And yet Jesus says, what do you have? I think he says that to every Christian, every follower of Jesus today in 21st century Britain, in Newport, Isle of Wight, the middle of 2011. What do you have? What do you have? What do you have? We might have a list already prepared. Well, I don't have much money, I don't have much ability, I don't have much, we as a church, Lord, we don't have this, and we don't stop with the don't have. What do you have? It's a great question. Jesus says, what's in your hand? What have you got? And actually between them, all they could start with was 5 loaves and 2 fish, and that was from a boy. It's not much, is it? To feed a crowd, to feed a multitude. And yet it goes down in history as the most amazing day when God breaks through. What's he asking of them? He's asking 2 things. Number 1, come into partnership with me. Come on an adventure with me. Come and work with me. I'm not going to do it for you all the the time. I'm going to do it through you. I'm going to do it with you. You and me. Together, we'll meet the needs of the crowd. That's fantastic. And I just believe, I'm getting excited about this because Jesus excites me. Because he's not finished with us. And when we think he should give up on us, he won't give up on us. He loves you. Got something for you to do. Got a plan for your life. And it's not about taking on somebody else's abilities or trying to be like so-and-so. It's just about being you. Being you. Ordinary people, extraordinary God. But he invites us in. And he says, if you bring what's in your hand, what you start with, however small it feels, I'll do the miracle. I'll start to multiply things. That's the story of this church already. You start with what you have, and one by one, person by person, family by family, people begin to come alive to God. And then you see, hey, we've got a bit more now. There's more of us. There's more of the evidence of God being at work in us. And you bring that to the Lord and say, Lord, this is what we have. Knowing that he wants to multiply it. Wants to partner. So, to close the message this morning, Jesus says, you give them something, and he's already got a plan. He knows that he's not going to leave them on their own to feed the crowd, but together they're going to do something. Wonder what together he wants to do with you guys in the coming year. Wonder what stories there are. Wonder what adventures there are. Wonder what things he wants to draw out of you by stirring those questions, by asking those questions. Might come in the prayer meeting, might come as you're cleaning the dishes or washing the car or out walking around the Isle of Wight. Might come when you're camping next weekend and just suddenly God drops a thought. It might be when you're on the streets on a Friday night, dealing with just that whole expression of people trying to find life and purpose and hope in the stuff of life. And he begins to say, come on, let's feed the crowd. Let's meet the needs of the crowd. You and me. Fantastic. What an adventure that is. So, then says, bring them here to me. See, we've got to look at what we start with, what we've got in our hands. But it doesn't stay there. What we're called to do is bring it to Jesus. Sometimes just say, Lord, here we are. Help. We haven't got much, but we're ready to do something fresh. We're ready to reach out again to our town, our community, to our neighbours, to even those that others maybe don't want us to go to. Even those sometimes that we even our most holy moments, we don't want to reach them. Because they're tough, they're hard, they're difficult. They don't like us. And we begin to say, Lord, bring you what I have and give it to you. And when they give it to Jesus, this loaves and the fish, he multiplies it. He breaks, he gives thanks, and he breaks it up, and he begins to give it to the disciples, and they take it to the crowds. It's an amazing thing. Not great detail here, but that really speaks to me. You see, the miracles happen here in the story, not all at once, but as they go. So Peter has to go to Jesus and take some bread, knowing there's a big crowd over there, that his bit, that he's going to feed. Jesus, you've got to do something. Because there's only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And I've got 500 people over here. 400 people. And he takes it in faith. I wonder if he's going, oh Lord help, this isn't going to go very far. But as he gives it, God begins to feed the crowd. Do you see what the point is? I can't make sense of that. I wish I was there to see it. The Bible tells us this is true. This happened before their eyes. As they gave it, it multiplied. Some of us, we're not going to see God at work really doing amazing things in those around us till we go, till we step out, till we say, till we do something, till we go to him and take the little that we feel we have, believe him for something. Now, I'm not just talking about sharing your story with somebody. It could be that, but it could be just
giving a bottle of water or a pair of flip-flops to somebody on the streets on a Friday night. It could be just about baking a cake for somebody and you know, that difficult person in your neighbourhood. You know, Tony wants lots of cake ministry his way by the look of that. And, you know, it could be making that phone call to somebody that, you know, that there's been a breakdown of relationship with. It could be just starting to pray for somebody from a distance. It could 1,000 different ways we start to say, yes, Lord, I don't feel like I've got very much. I don't even feel like I know what to say or what to do, but here I am. I want to be used by you in reaching the needs of the crowds all around me. So as they go, the miracle happens. And I guess as they come back, they've all got, it's amazing. It seemed like nothing, but they're all filled. They've all had their full. And just to show that this is a God thing, there's 12 basketfuls left over for the disciples. More than enough. Do you know God is a God of more than enough? Even in your life and mine, He wants to give you more than you would ask or imagine, the Bible says. He's a God of more than enough. I believe we've got to put flesh on this, or put legs on it. Not make it super spiritual. But that miracle, the feeding of the 5,000, actually, it's all about just giving them some dinner. It's not about legs growing or blind eyes opening. That's happened earlier in the day. But this is just everyday, practical stuff where they get a meal. And I'm not sure that most of the crowd even think about it. 2 days later, they've probably forgotten it even happened. Because the miracle was really only properly seen by the disciples up close. They knew what they'd started with, and how impossible this was, and how hard their hearts were, and how tired and weary they were, and how they had just gone home and given up. But God wasn't finished with them. He wanted to teach them something. When you get involved in the everyday stuff, never mind the great healing service that has just been, good as that is, but when you get involved in the ordinary stuff of meeting people's needs, I'll do miracles. I'll soften people's heart because you gave them that cake, or wrote that letter, or smiled at them. I read something just yesterday that happiness is contagious, and so is depression, actually. The latest studies from Harvard University in the States have said that happiness is contagious. If you smile at people, their likelihood to pick up during the day goes up by 25%. If it's a close friend and you're spending time together, it goes up by something like 65%. Just mood lifting, mood enhancing. It's the same when you're around people that are really severely depressed. You have to really watch your own spirit in that. Yeah, by that I mean your own emotions, because it can just drag you down. And I believe that we need to have great compassion on one another in the moods of life, because, you know, we will all suffer and struggle with moments and times and seasons when things are tough, and we're struggling emotionally and chemically and physically to respond to that. So I'm not speaking against that, but I'm saying, you know, actually Jesus wants to do something, start something with us where it's going to be infectious for people to begin to trust Him in new ways, begin to share their stories of how He's changed them, and just to begin in very simple ways. To bring the message to a close, Jesus does something extraordinary with them. What He says, I think He shows them in this moment the miracles are not just going to happen from arm's length by my mighty power. They're going to happen up close. And I don't necessarily choose that word lightly today, miracles, because it's so easy for us in the West in this century to be so cynical about the miraculous power of God. But God is a miracle-working God. The greatest miracle is that your heart and mind would open to Him. And that after years of living our own way, we'd actually realise that He's the Saviour of the world, and that He wants to give hope. The greatest miracle is when your eyes open to Jesus, and you can start to live God's way. Because before that we couldn't, could we? However we tried. The great miracle to come to know Him in relationship. But there's also loads of little miracles waiting to happen as hearts change, relationships change, as people's hope and future begins to be revealed. God begins to just work on people one by one at a time. He wants to call you and me into a greater adventure in everyday miracles. Jack Heath's, the guy we started with, wrote off 2 Porsches, went into the spotlight for a couple of days. The real story is not Jack and the £60,000 worth of damage on his final day of driving, but Jack Heath's 93 years old, who had such an impact on the driver, the owner of one of those cars, that she could overlook the dents in her car and begin to talk to Jack about the dents in her life and in her heart.